SoundCloud, and good. All right. Welcome, everyone. And if you'll help me welcome Laura Prichard. We're so lucky to have you, Laura. And thank you for agreeing to do this again with this very interesting topic, Baroque Voices from Mexico. And I know you've prepared a lecture here, and I want to give you plenty of time to do that. Just for all of you to know a little bit about Laura, if you didn't read her bio, she lectures for the San Francisco Opera and many other organizations. She's given lectures at many universities around the country, including Harvard. And I'm trying to recall off the top of my head. I remember you're working on a very cool encyclopedia right now. Have you completed that?
Um, well, I'm one of the founding music editors for Wikipedia when it first started in the 90s, and we thought there might be 100 people using it a day. So I
Wow.
think there's 100 people using it a second now, or something crazy like that, maybe more than that. When we started out, I volunteered to be one of the three people that would make sure the music articles all looked good. And, now that would be crazy. So if someone goes in and they delete Beethoven, I get a notice saying, please fix Beethoven, things like that.
Oh, really? Wow. Do
There are
you have
reset
it?
buttons, but any student that's super interested in music can go in and fill out the form and apply to be an editor and can contribute to Wikipedia pages. So when I contribute, I add footnotes to real scholarly journals and encyclopedias and books, so you can find out where I got the information from.
What are some of your contributions on Wikipedia?
Lately, I've gone through and I've rewritten and added footnotes and sound recordings to all of the basic music theory terms because I'm teaching a couple of basic music theory classes at the new music program at the main community college here in Boston called Bunker Hill Community College. And so we want to make sure for that particular school, all their materials are available for free,
Okay.
open source. So we double check everything.
That's
Yeah.
great. I'm not gonna
Yeah,
pay
but
attention. I just have to be on in there.
Oh, make sure you have your
yeah,
mute
yeah.
on,
You
please.
just go to Wikipedia and there's a little button in the corner that says, click here if you would like to be one of the contributors, and you fill it out and you put your email, and then anytime that you would add something, you would log in and it would credit you with that information. So if someone wanted to argue with you about it, which is one of the fun things. Once you're logged in, you can argue with people about a sentence or something like that and go back and forth and
Fun.
change it. So, very rarely Wikipedia will lock an article. For example, um, there's been a controversy among psychologists and people who teach college psychology lately about the Rorschach blots,
Mm-hmm.
the original
Yes.
pictures developed by Rorschach that are still used for some psychology tests. And a person went in and they put all the pictures up online and put some explanations that they thought were common. And a lot of psychologists said, "No, you're ruining it. People are supposed to have their own feelings. They're not supposed to read about it." And they argued enough that they locked that article temporarily, so people can't continue to delete them and undelete them.
Oh,
So there's a
wow.
lot of
Interesting.
really fun stuff that goes on there. But I write for actual encyclopedias. There's an encyclopedia of Latin American popular music that's published, and a few other things like that. So.
Yeah. Well, very cool. Well, we're really excited to hear what you have to say about the Mexican Baroque.
Sure.
And whenever you're ready.
Okay. I'm going to start by doing a little bit of show and tell. Um, and so let's see. I think when I'm talking, is it correct that my screen becomes the main screen? Can they see me talking when I'm
Yes.
talking? Okay. So I was just going to do a little bit of show and tell. When Europeans first arrived in the New World, and this is really the Spanish first before anyone else, or at least Spanish funded folks, they found that there was a very strong tradition of singing already. And so, especially priests would document what they saw and what they heard. And so, in the very first contact records, you find written mainly in Spanish, people from Europe saying, the natives sing very well. The natives sing in tune, and they compliment them a lot, but they compliment them in this sort of sense that if you landed on Mars, you would be amazed that the Martians could carry a tune and that kind of thing. So when I read that, I'm not so much offended on behalf of Native peoples that the Europeans are allowing them to be good, as it's amazing to me that they seem to share some aesthetic sense, that they sang in tune the same way. They have both had an idea of what it meant to sustain a melody and to especially to shape a song by having long connected phrases and then a contrasting section that might be 4 or 5 notes up. We would call it in Western music starting in the tonic or home key, and then a middle part that's a dominant or a fifth up. And then you find that all over native Latin America and South America. You find it still in the American Southwest as well. So I wanted to show you a couple of traditional instruments that have survived. Obviously, drums with skins on them and any kind of animal materials that involve leather and skin aren't going to last for hundreds and thousands of years. Those materials are organic, so they'll kind of fall away. So some of what I have are recreations of instruments and some are traditional. So just a couple things to let you know. What would you see if you could arrive with new eyes, for example, European eyes in Mexico, in Latin America, and in South America in the 1500s? One of the typical things you'd see, just kind of hold a few things up, would be different kinds of gourds. And the original seeds would still be in the gourds, and they'd be very soft, and you would use them for intimate lyrical music, like singing a lullaby or singing a medicinal song. And if you sung it, and this is still true in, for example, Arizona and California in our country, if you sing these traditional songs badly, you can make the person sicker, maybe even kill them if you're super sloppy. And if you sing this song passably, you wouldn't improve their health. But if you sing it really, really well, accurately, and with a sense of integrity, the right rhythms, the right notes, then you might be able to make them feel better. So just some examples. Here, as you can see, compared to the size of my hand, a gourd rattle, and it has on it very small carvings. This has been scratched with a knife, and then the whole gourd, when it was wet, was rubbed in ash, and the ash gets in those wet cracks. And so there's animals and people singing, people performing, and that's one source that we have to know what did music performance look like. Very soft sound, just the seeds inside. When you get close to the northern border of Mexico, especially in the state of New Mexico, the Pueblo areas, you find the gourd used just for the head of the instrument. And so they can take off the stick that goes into it. It's not a full gourd, just a wooden stick. And inside, let's see if I can do this without spilling it, you would have corn. Instead of, let's see if I can do this like this, corn inside the rattle instead of the native dry seeds of the rattle, and you get sort of a higher sound. I'll put this rattle back together. This one is from Taos Pueblo in northern central New Mexico, and it's used for ceremonies for girls coming of age. And there's a whole repertoire of about 40 songs, and it's decorated in this case with some feathers, and you've got little bird tracks on it, so you get the sound of corn shaking in the rattle. A little bit louder. When you move south into Mexico, you get larger gourds. This one is a gourd that's been washed in an acid solution so it wouldn't rot. It's dried, it has its original seeds in it, and then my nephew, whose main interest is Mesoamerican art. He's an undergrad at the Art Institute of Chicago, so he studies ancient art and makes his own recreations of it, including drawing symbols from it on his tennis shoes. Maybe that's a future job, I'm not sure. He made this for me. He took a gourd, he washed it, and then he painted abstract designs on it representing cloud formations. And then his last name happens to be Cortez. That's a European name, of course. Cortez, he signed his art as an artist, and you can hear the seeds. So if I were going to sing in one of the native languages of central Mexico, for example, the language of Nahua, there are songs existing that we think are thousands of years old. So let me put a couple of things into the chat. So you can see some of these words. Okay, looking for the chat, just one second. Okay, there is a brand new opera that's just been composed and premiered in 2014 in the Nawa language. And Xochitl or Xochitl refers to flowers and ceremonies, and the Quequechli refers to songs or performances. So it's sort of like the ceremony of beautiful flowers. And in that opera is featured a traditional song that's still sung in southern Arizona. And it's got a couple of Nawa words in it and some vocables, some nonsense syllables. So I just want to use my Mexican rattle and sing for you a little bit in Nawa so you get a sense of a simple ceremonial song. And you'll hear a low phrase that sounds like it's in a home key, sort of like a tonic key, let's say C major or something. And then you'll hear a contrasting phrase that's up 5 notes. A classical person would say in the dominant. And so if you're a European and you arrive and you hear this, you think, oh my God, they write songs just like us. They are good. They are well constructed. So here's a song. Let me sing it and then I'll tell you what it's about. So you go. Ha shali wali wa ha komoko ma ha shali wali wa. Repeat. Ha shali wali wa ha komoko ma ha shali wali wa. Breath. Ha shali wali wa ha komoko ma ha shali wali wa ha komoko ma. And it has the word for corn, komoko, and it has the word for little bird, and it's a particular hungry kind of bird, shali. And so you basically say here, ha-ah, corn, 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 ha-ah, little bird, little bird, corn, ha-ah-ah. So it's a song, and you would imitate it by your feet going toe, heel, toe, heel, toe, heel. And you'd kind of do a little bit of a bird motion to it. And you would, instead of beating on a large drum, you would have rattles. And you find that a large group sitting around a drum beating a constant sound is more typical in North America. And then these different kinds of gourd rattles are more common in native Mexico and South America and Latin America. This is an example from a little bit farther south. It's made of dried reeds. It's a little basket rattle. So you've got a piece of vegetable on the bottom, dried. It's a little, sort of like a little pumpkin side. And then dried grass. And you make it into a little basket. You just weave it very carefully. You put river rocks in it. Brighter sound. That's more like what you'd find in southern Latin America. And then in places that have giant moths, in California, you find these in the Yosemite Valley, moth cocoon rattles. So that's a moth, if you look at the size of my thumb, that's a moth cocoon. You can collect that off a tree and dry it, put river rocks in it. And this one's actually from Yosemite Valley. And so it has a little bit of coyote fur on it that they found. A coyote was scratching himself on a bush and they collected it. They didn't hold down the coyote and harm him. But similar sound, river rocks. And so these aren't used for great big huge ceremonies. These are used in very intimate settings. They're fairly quiet. And there are just a couple of other things. Instead of a big drum like you might see in native North America with a huge membrane over it to hit with a stick, you find drums made of single sticks. You just hollow it out. You can burn that out, put a tiny slit in it, and then you just clap it. If I didn't have the slit in it, it would be much quieter. Here I hold the slit closed. So the same kind of thing. And most of the traditional songs that you find from Mexico tend to be in a 3 feeling. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, that kind of sound. Just a couple more art objects. Typical ceremonial art from the east coast of Mexico is a jaguar mask. And it's a modern material. They've put beeswax on a wooden back. They carved the wood into the shape of the face of the jaguar. Or I guess if you're a fan of Marvel Universe, you might say Black Panther. And you put it over your face. And there's 2 holes up here for me to look through. And I can use this as a dance mask. And I put beeswax all over it. And then I could press river stones into it. This one is made with, if I hold it up a little closer, it's made with plastic modern beads. And you see different symbols. You see a corn symbol in white, you see a peyote symbol, and you'd use that as a mask, and then you'd sing through it, and it's kind of amplifies your voice a little bit. Sort of fun to use. Now, that's what you find if you arrive from Europe. You see all this, you see bright colors, you see people wearing a lot of metal and even banging metal together. And if you arrive from Europe, you arrive with string instruments. So some of these are little tiny guitars and some of these are huge. This is a guitarrón. So if you compare it to the size of my head, it is a bass guitar. Usually a guitarrón, these developed from Baroque guitars. This is the bass instrument. It would have 3 metal strings and 3 plastic strings. You don't need to plug it in because the back of it is curved or vaulted. So all the sound that comes out of the hole is very loud because you have, instead of a flat back, if I turn it around, you can see that the back is sort of round and it acts like a natural speaker. It's a really loud instrument. And so if you're plucking a bass line, you get this really resonant sound from the metal strings and from the plastic modern strings, sort of a quieter sound on top. And you can make your own bass line. So that's a handmade one of very basic materials. If you traveled to Mexico, you could get this for about $300. And you can accompany as the bass instrument in a modern mariachi group. So you have a clash of these cultures. And the thing I think they have the most in common is the love of singing. And that is the main way that the Europeans enticed local natives to come and be involved in mission life at first. And especially young kids, and especially boys, to sing as sopranos, to sing as boy choirs, with the Spanish priests singing Latin. So I want to show you a bunch of pictures and I want to show you some musical examples. California has more groups that are interested in keeping mariachi alive and professional and bringing back Baroque Latin American, Mexican, and South American music than any other state in this country. So I'll be playing you some examples of Californian groups. So let me share my screen. The question, is that guitar out of tune? Yes, so the guitar is called a guitarrón. And I actually updated the Wikipedia article on it, so you can go and look at it. It tells you the most typical tuning and gives you some examples of ways that it's used as a bass instrument. And mariachi has evolved a lot over the last 200 years, but you can actually get a graduate degree in it in a couple of California universities. UCLA is one of the main centers of research on the history of it, and you can get a master's degree in it. And in the San Francisco area, especially in San Francisco, in the Mission District, and in the area around San Jose at the bottom of the San Francisco Bay, there are a lot of professional mariachi bands that people can actually make their living doing it. And okay, did I make the mask? I did not make this mask. I've made another one. This is kind of highly professional. This one is from Puerto Vallarta along the left coast or the western coast of Mexico. And I bought it there because my uncle had lived there. He's no longer alive, but he lived there for the last 30 years of his life. He was a stained glass artist in LA during World War II. And then he retired to Puerto Vallarta and encouraged artists down there. So let me share my screen, and I want to show you a couple of things first. I put in the chat that, let me get a few of these things out of the way so I have less on the screen. Put the chat away. And in the introduction that I wanted to play for you an example of the very newest thing first. And this is an example of, make sure I'm doing the right one. It's not Luis Baca. Yes. This is an example of a work that was newly composed in Nahua, and they're trying to encourage especially modern Mexican composers to write in native languages and bring back indigenous sounds. So you heard just a few moments of someone playing a wooden slit drum and a couple of membrane drums. And then you'll hear a little bit of singing in the Nahuatl language in this new opera composed only 7 years ago.
Era como muy importante también hacer un vínculo entre lo que se considera el arte culto, ¿no? La ópera, esta cosa intocable, ¿no? Y ese espectador especial y tan necesario para nosotros como es el de las comunidades indígenas.
This is a scene from it. They show women grinding corn. There's a little bit of modern dance in it.
What does it feel like to
Okay, pause. All right, so I'll come back to that. So what I'm going to do is show you a series of slides and start far back in time and move toward the present. And I'm going to concentrate on what we would call the Baroque period in music. And this is, let's just play this, a short set of slides. So, early voices of Latin America. I'm going to play for you Mexican examples and also South American examples because we have information about what those traditions looked like and sounded
I
like.
joined it's a lecture on the Baroque period of music in Mexico or in Latin America.
Okay, and somebody needs to mute themselves. I'm going to go right on. Okay, so if you're in Europe in the Renaissance or the beginning of the Baroque, one of the ways we study the music of that period is to look at imagery. So, for example, who was singing, who was allowed to sing in the early Catholic Church, and you can look at resources that are on vellum and paper, and you can look at icons in architecture, and you can find pictures like this on the left. In the medieval, the Renaissance, and the early Baroque period, you have on the left male saints singing on the left side of the image and female saints singing on the right side of the image. And we know that for a long time, men and women sung either at the same time together or men and women sang alternating. In the picture on the right, when you get into the Renaissance, 1400s, early 1500s, you start to see more often pictures of angels singing. And so here's a famous example of a group of 8 angels, and they're all kind of trying to look onto the same one book. They're dressed very formally. They're showing a lot of respect for what a musician, even an angelic musician, might look like. In this particular case, the same model has been used as the face of all 8 angels. And it's interesting to me, it's not a very feminine or a very masculine face. It's sort of a neutral face and neutral hair that could be worn by a man or a woman in the 1400s. So this is an example of, two examples of how you would depict sacred music and song from Europe in the period just before Europeans start to travel to the New World. I just want to remind everybody that when we talk about sacred music, we're not just talking about men writing music, men composing and performing music, but there was a parallel tradition of women, especially abbesses and nuns and people working in all female sacred settings, also of composing music. So this is one of those most famous of women composers, and her name's Hildegard von Bingen. You see her on the left being inspired by sacred fire. That's the red above her head. You see her on the top right being inspired and having song coming out of her mouth. You see her in the bottom right conducting a group of women singers. Now in the New World, it was very rare for nuns or abbesses to travel there. And so in the New World, we find that the history of creating musical groups and teaching how to sing European music was done mainly by men, just because of who was on the ships and how the groups traveled together. But it's important to remember women's voices were present in sort of a parallel tradition. These are images from Baroque Mexico. On the left, you see a carved statue, and this is an image of a person called the Flower Prince, and his name appears at the top. Xochi means flower in Nahua, and Pili means prince or ruler in Nahua. So this is Xochipilli, and Xochipilli is singing there and looking up, so it's sacred song. And Xochipilli is sitting on an altar, and on the front of the altar, sort of shaded by Xochipilli's feet, is a flower that's called the five flower. Makwi means five, and again, Xochi means flower. So the Makwil Xochitl, the five flower sort of altar. And you see when people are dancing, they tend to dance around in shapes, sort of in this flower shapes. They add flowers and they add anything related to this word Xochi or flower. They add those images onto musical instruments very often. The main musical instrument that was considered something like a trumpet, or we would say, clarinets, wind instruments, flutes, saxophones, is a shell trumpet. And that's considered the noise or the sound that allows the world to be created. The world is brought into existence because of the sound of a shell trumpet. And so the name of that is Kui Kuitzli. And let me show you one. Just grab it from next door. It's a little bit sharp, so I had it nearby. If I exit out of my sharing for a second, shell trumpet, you've probably seen one before. It looks like a conch shell, C-O-N-C-H, and because it's a natural spiral generated by the snail, you just cut off the top of the natural spiral and you use it like a trumpet mouthpiece. And so you just buzz your lips and you can make sound. So this is the sound that in native Mexico is the sound that creates the world. Instead of, I think in the beginning of the Bible, it says, and God said, let there be light. So instead of saying, you blow the trumpet and that calls the world into existence because of all the vibrations. So it sounds like this. Oh, sorry. Got to practice. And that's a sound that would call people to ceremonies. Now in Mexico and in Latin America, 20 is an important number, and many of the parts of civilization count in base 20. And so what we find, go back to sharing, is that every 20 days in central Mexico, there was a big musical festival or ceremony. And on the right here, you see a drawing on the top right by a priest in the 1500s saying there's a central figure that's sitting and singing, and people are dancing around with rattles and clappers in a circular shape. And then in the bottom right picture, if I click on it, I think I can get them to dance. Yeah, I animated them a little bit. Singing and dancing. And these are from documents that exist in Italian libraries of Renaissance and Baroque documents. And these drawings were made by European priests of what they saw when they arrived in Mexico. Now, there's no word music exactly in Nahua. There is this word Cuicatla Mati Litzli. And that means the art of song or the art of singing. Our sense of music and musician, that could mean someone picking up a flute and playing, doesn't really exist in this. The important thing is the human voice and song. And the cuicat is the word for singing. Musicians sang their instruments. So if you had a flute, you wouldn't say, I play the flute or I use the flute. You'd say, I sing the flute. You wouldn't say, I dance. You would say, I sing with my feet. So it's just interesting that the idea of the voice really pervades the whole culture. Let me go back to playing the slide slightly bigger. Okay, top pictures are examples of surviving instruments in the Archaeology Museum in Mexico City. The bottom three pictures are drawings by European priests that survive in a codex, a book of drawings from the 1500s. And it's called the Florentine Codex because the book is kept in Florence, Italy. And these are drawings from the ceremonies that took place. Priests, courtiers, they're using words that they understood as Europeans, highly placed members of the native society, And on the left, you see song and notes coming out of someone's voice. In the center, you see people dressed more formally to lead a procession in a ceremony. And on the far right, this is how the Europeans started dressing up little native boys and teaching them to hold a book with Latin words and teaching them to sing in Latin so they could, as quickly as possible, recreate the full choral sound of sacred music from Europe. Some of it's just everyone singing in unison, and some of it's actually part singing, especially unaccompanied part singing in Latin. So we're going to listen to an example that has 3 Latin words and the rest Nahuatl words. For a long time, we said the composer of this piece was Hernando Franco. He was a priest born in Spain in 1532, and he was active in Guatemala for about 5 years, and then he was active in Mexico City for closer to 10 years, and he died in Mexico City. Now we think the priest knew a certain amount of Nahuatl, but we think it's likely that it was actually composed, or at least partly composed, with the involvement of a native contemporary of the priest Hernando Franco. He trained a lot of musicians who were natives, and he even taught native musicians to build their own violins and make their own cellos. So it seems like at least it's probably a collaboration and not just a Spanish-born priest writing an entire piece of music by himself and thinking to use all this Nahuatl text. So I'm going to make this a little smaller and let me play this for you. Second verse, different words. There's 2 whole more verses of it. So what you heard was you heard a single voice singing a melody for this whole first part. Dios meaning God. The rest of it in Nahuatl, translating pretty typical kind of Catholic prayer to Mary, the Mother of God, kind of like the Ave Maria or the Hail Mary. And then at the end, Jesu Cristo in Latin. So you have you start with the Latin or Spanish word for God. And you have lots of Nahuatl. And then you have Jesu Cristo in the European language at the end. So let me put that link in the chat. And I do have an email with the complete set of all of these links. I'll make sure your teacher has it. And you can request that you're sent all of those links if you want to. All right, go away, chat. And let's go on and hear some more things. So that's an example of something from the 1500s that is a mix of European elements and native elements. We know a lot more about what music 500 years ago sounded like in Brazil because Brazil had less contact and Brazil's been able to preserve a lot of its native culture in a more kind of pure way, partly because it has areas that have fewer roads. Some have no roads at all, and you have to walk and journey by river for days to get there. So I want to let you listen to a kind of music that's been very untouched by Europe. And I have a map over here of the middle of South America, and you can see a red mark in the very far left side of Brazil, way up in the mountains. And that border region between Peru and Brazil and Colombia, that's still very difficult to get to, and honestly it's not very safe unless you look like a local. There's quite an industry now of kidnapping someone that doesn't look like a local and then asking for money. And so it's an area that's fairly cut off from, I guess, what I would call modern, contemporary, modernized society. And so you have a wonderful opportunity to bring recording devices in there and hear something that is older and less touched. Top left picture, you see native attire using local feathers. And on the top right, you see a modern drone photo just taken a few years ago of a village. And in black underneath the photos, you see the Spanish name for this little town, Aldea Nova Esperanza. Oh, no, not Spanish, sorry, Portuguese. Aldea Nova Esperanza. And then the TI is the Brazilian designation for native area. So TI meaning this native community, and its local name is Yawanawa. And this has been continuously inhabited. It's never been wiped out. They've never had a problem with too many folks dying from disease and having to resettle it. It was never taken over, for example, by the Spanish or the Portuguese. So let's listen to what music from there sounds like. And you'll hear clear, beautiful melodies. You will hear short phrases and a sense that might remind you of European folk music. So you can see why someone visiting here would say, it sounds good, it sounds like us, we have things in common. So this is Shosho Parante, and let me put the picture back up while you're listening.
Shosho Parante, Shosho Parante, Shosho Parante, Shosho Parante. Shosho Parante, Shosho Parante, Shosho Parante, Shosho Parante. Tau tapuna machum, 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 tau tapuna machum. Mi vakawaneke, mi vakawaneke, mi vakawaneke, mi vakawaneke, mi vakan kashae, mi vakan kashae, mi vakan kashae, mi vakan kashae. Iwi yowa, iwi yowa.
Okay, so you hear one voice calling and the other responding. And I've taught American music as a course for a lot of years. And one of the things you teach when you talk about American or European contact with West Africa is how important the structure of call and response is in West Africa. So it's interesting to me to know that it's also found all over Latin America and all over native South America, call and response, instead of a written down tradition and a written language, but that they have a very similar sense to Europeans of what singing in tune means, and of a group coming in and singing either the exact same notes in unison or in octaves. So there's a lot in common between older European music and older South American music. Let's go on and listen a little bit more. What happens when the Jesuits arrive and start building missions? In South America, they build huge cathedrals, and then war comes to Spain and Portugal, and the Jesuit and the Franciscan branches of the Catholic Church are at odds with each other. And so in South America in general, the Jesuit missions are destroyed. So if you visited South America and you wanted to see where were some of these original sites where Europeans were building great cathedrals to create places to worship and to sing in Latin, sacred European music, in South America you'd mostly find this. You'd find huge carved ruins of mostly destroyed churches and cathedrals. In Mexico, you find preserved churches and cathedrals. And in California, you find that the missions grew and grew and grew and turned into major cities. So the mission names, San Diego, San Francisco, named after saints originally, have kind of survived. In the jungles of South America, you find this. Kind of abandoned things. But if you look closely at them, and I'll show you a close-up, when there are angels carved on them, the angels have the faces of local people. So it's interesting to see some of that close up. Let me show you a different picture. On the top, Here's a destroyed mission in Argentina. And these aren't destroyed by natives. These are destroyed by Spaniards coming in and saying, this is the wrong kind of Catholicism or the wrong approach to religion, and taking each other's missions down. In the bottom left here, you see an angel carved, very likely carved by native artisan with a native face on the angel. And this particular angel is holding a seed rattle, not a European instrument. And you find those carved all over these huge abandoned cathedrals. This is Argentina, the top brown pictures, and in the bottom right, you find a kind of a beautiful but austere old destroyed mission in Brazil. That's more from the 1700s. So if you're thinking about the Baroque period in European history, 16 and 1700s, huge cathedrals were being built in the New World, and they don't survive as often in South America. Let me let you hear and see a film scene that is trying to recreate what it would have been like to arrive at one of these missions in South America and hear that the priests had trained native voices to sing and to welcome the guests. So this is actually filmed at a carved original building in southern Mexico, and it's from a movie from the 1980s called The Mission. And it is trying to show what the Guarani Indians of South America would have sounded like when they were trained and organized by Spanish-speaking mission priests. So this is only the scenes from the movie that have that kind of singing in it, a mix of native vocal style and European vocal style. And they tried really hard to recreate appropriate costumes. They consulted a lot of experts in local native dress, costume, and way of moving. This is a church built in the New World. You hear flutes. Now, the text you're hearing them sing is a Latin hymn to Mary, the mother of Jesus. In Latin, they're saying Ave Maria. In English, you'd say Hail Mary. And this part that you hear is newly composed music by the modern film composer Morricone. So he's just imagining what the music would have sounded like. So this isn't traditional Ave Maria music, but we know that people arrived and heard, especially boys, trained to sing Ave Maria. So the music's a little more modern here, but I just want you to look at the scene and look at how much of the community, really all of the community, is involved in singing and, in this case, holding up palms. This is a Palm Sunday service. So for me, this is an interesting movie because it's basically a tragic movie that really tries to deal with some of the negative impacts of two different approaches of Catholicism being present in the New World and the tensions of Europe coming and affecting the lives of natives. In general, this particular mission that's depicted is sort of the idealized world. Everyone's getting along. The Europeans are bringing things that are useful to the local people. It's not showing much of the realistic negative side of some of the missions. But it's an interesting thing to watch. And a lot of attention was paid to trying to make many aspects of it accurate. Let's hear some of the things. I wanted to put one link in here. If you are interested in this and you really want to read detail about it, there's this one really great article by Kristen Mann, and she has done probably more research than anybody else about what was going on in the missions and the songs and the dances and the specific influences on things, if you want to read more specific examples. So let you see some examples of more, I guess, what you would expect if you're thinking, what is Baroque music, European Baroque music? Where is it performed in the New World? And what does it sound like? So let me show you a few pictures first really quickly. Here's a surviving church in Cusco, Peru. And it is, let's see if I can move this out of the way. Sorry, can't quite see what I'm doing. Hang on one second. Got a little ruler here that's in the way. Try it one more time. All right, play slideshow. Okay, church in Cusco. Original building still survives from the 1600s, and you can see an interior altar in front of which people would stand and perform. They would perform with a tiny keyboard, usually plucked string keyboard, harpsichord, and then they would have strummed string instruments. Once in a while, a priest would bring with them something like a beautiful Baroque oboe or a simple wooden flute from Europe. But in general, people are performing vocal music in one line and in parts, and sometimes if they had instruments or they would make their own instruments, they would have the instruments exactly support and copy the voices. So here's Cusco's main metropolitan church that survives from that period. Here's the inside of the largest Baroque church in Lima, and they've got here gold and then blue representing either the sky or the sea. So this is another very decorated, beautiful space where you would hear mainly choral music.
One of the cathedrals that survived.
What? Sorry?
Are these one of the cathedrals?
Yes. Yeah, these survive. Yeah, these are modern photos of things in the biggest cities. These are coastal places, not sort of deep in the jungles where the smaller missions were. So that's Cusco, Peru. And this is Lima, Peru, the capital of Peru, inside sort of the most ornate church. And this is an example of an opera that was composed, and it's called La Púrpura de la Rosa. It's from 1701, and it's by Tomás Velasco. And it's the very first opera composed anywhere in South America, before any opera was composed in Mexico. The top center picture, you can see like the title page, and you can see what the music looked like when it was written out. It's written in Spanish, and you have a melody, just the melody only, and you can see the notes there going do 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 do. And this is all that survives of it. We don't know what the accompaniment instruments were. We don't know what the bass notes were. That all has to be studied and reconstructed. So this is an opera that can be performed based on this original manuscript that got printed. And it's just a typical opera of the 1700s. It's based on characters from Greek mythology, from Europe. You see the picture up in the top right corner. It's not a native story. It doesn't have native characters, but it is the very first opera that was composed in South America and then performed in South America. So let you hear a little bit of that. Here is a reconstructed chorus. So all that survives of it is the top line, and then descriptions that it was sung in 5 parts, and then that contrasted with solo operatic singing accompanied by instruments. So let you hear a little bit of it. This is a reconstruction from 1701 from Peru. They play it first, all the notes on guitar. A solo. Okay, and that says Calliope. That is one of the Greek muses, and Calliope has a solo, singing about the beauty of music, and then the chorus will come back in and sing again. So that's an example of what an opera stage music would sound like right around 1700. Let me show you some of the Mexican spaces. I've showed you South American spaces, a little bit of the sound of South American performing dramatic music. This is a surviving cathedral. They broke ground for it in 1660, and it was completed in 1744 and fully decorated by then. So you can see gold again. And one thing for me that looks a little bit unusual is that although you see saints in the front, which you would expect in a European church in this period, the main art is huge paintings of very specific historical priests and historical specific natives that we know the names of who when they first met. So it shows a priest arriving that founded a mission, and it shows particular people that they met, and in general that's pretty well documented exactly what's going on. Sometimes you'll see a sacred figure floating in the air of the painting, but you have sort of history paintings in these churches. This is from a city called Morelia in Mexico. It's from a district or a kind of a big province of Mexico, Michoacan, which now is full of folk music and mariachi music, but it has this sort of more ancient European building. Let me show you a couple more. These are incredibly beautiful resonant spaces. This is from Oaxaca in the south of Mexico. A bigger cathedral, decorated more in black and white, but with a gold altar in front, and European saints, Catholic saints, carved and fully painted. Really beautiful. This one took 200 years to complete. Very echoey. It's got a 6-second echo. It's great for that kind of choral music we just heard. This is a cathedral that's been partly burned and rebuilt a few times. The Metropolitan Cathedral in the center of Mexico City. And there's still a big open square and parade ground in front of most of this cathedral. The middle of this is pretty similar still today, where big public festivals take place. But this started out just as a tiny mission church and then grew by the 1800s into a huge cathedral with a fully professional music department. And instead of importing boy sopranos from Europe to sing, the boy sopranos were almost always native kids who were trained to sing in Latin. And they received free room and board, and their families received stipends and things like that. So they were considered as professional as European boy choirs. Now, the first opera that was composed or performed in North America was written by a man named Zumaya, Z-U-M-I-Y-A. He was born in Mexico City, Mexico in 1678. He was of Spanish descent, not of native descent, and spent his whole life in New Spain, Mexico. and died in Oaxaca in 1755. So a fairly long life, about 70, 80 years. And his opera, that's the first one to be composed in North America, is called La Partenope. And again, it's based on Greek mythology. This is a picture of him wearing a European-style powdered wig and European-style court attire, playing a European-style kind of a modern cello. And this particular instrument survives, and it's actually signed, and it was made by someone of native descent, not imported from Europe. So they came with designs, and they taught instrument making. And so you have a mix of native-made rattles and traditional instruments and native-made European instruments. There's some really incredible string orchestras that were all native players or one or two Spaniards like this sitting in. This is a picture of what opera looked like in the same period in Europe. Europe had opera stars who were men who had undergone an operation as boys that were known as castrati, so that their bodies would continue to grow, and sometimes they would have very long legs, very long arms, and be even a little bit weirdly tall. But their head would be normal size, and their voice would be normal volume for a typical man, but it would still be very high in pitch. And so when people draw pictures of scenes of opera around 1700s, they kind of are making fun of these guys. So they draw the castrati just a little bit bigger than they were. They draw a normal-sized woman singing a soprano or alto part. And then they draw little people, smaller people who are also present in opera. And then here another castrato. So you have a high-voiced man singing a hero or a god. You have a high-voiced woman singing a female character. You have on the right side another high-voiced man singing. And so that sound does exist in New Spain. You have basically people singing soprano and alto. No basses really yet, no tenors really yet, very commonly in the sound of opera. And then let me just go to this. Vivaldi, famous Baroque composer living in Venice. He's very well known for his string music. He wrote an opera in Venice in 1733 with an all colonial theme, and it's based on Montezuma, real person from the New World. And the costumes, these are costumes created in Dallas, Texas in 2002 when they revived and put back together Vivaldi's opera. So let me let you see some scenes of their work. There's a lot of interest in this now to try to revive European works that honor or refer to or tell stories collected by priests and made popular in Europe in the Baroque period. So this is the Italian composer Vivaldi writing an Italian opera in 1733 and scenes from the New World retold in opera. See scenes of conquest. That's a woman singing Cortez. So Cortez has just put Cortez's hands on the Indian maiden, and she has stabbed him. So Cortez sings a whole aria here in Italian about how it was not fun to be stabbed, and how he realizes now the fire and the spirit of the New World. And that was originally castrato role, and here in a modern production, you have a woman singing Cortez. So listen to a little bit of that. Sounds a lot like typical Baroque music. One emotion's being expressed. It's very, very flowery music. this video has about 10 minutes of the 3 hours of the opera. Let me just stop sharing my screen a minute and put that in the chat also. So you might want to check that out a little bit. That's very typical European Baroque opera, but it's got a native theme to it. Let me show you just a couple more pictures. I'm almost done with the pictures. Pictures. Okay, here we go. Close the chat. Play the pictures one more time. Last time. All right, so the company that I find the most interesting that's doing this kind of work is called the American Baroque Opera Company in Dallas, Texas. And by American Baroque, they mean things with American themes and also typical Baroque opera from Europe. So they're the company that's kind of the most interested in these topics of how do the Europeans tell these stories of conquest. In the case of this opera, it's a story from the middle 1700s telling about what happened a whole 100 years earlier and kind of portraying the Spaniards as the bad guys and the villains. These are Italians retelling the stories of the Spanish conquest in the New World. So you get a little bit of subtlety to this, not always pro-Europe and anti-native. In the New World, gradually, huge opera houses were built. So I wanted to show you the two kind of most beautiful ones, in my opinion. In the 1840s, when there were plans to build what is now the big Parisian Opera House in the center of Paris, they had already finished in the 1840s an opera house. You can see how big it is on the left in central Mexico City. And a couple thousand people could sit in there and hear opera. In the bottom right corner, you see this is a photo taken just of the ceiling looking up of the opera house built along the Amazon River, halfway along 1,000 miles away from the Atlantic Ocean in Brazil, surrounded by jungle. And there's this incredible European opera house where concerts are still given today and operas are still put on. So it's interesting to me that this kind of music was considered such high culture that a huge amount of resources and effort would go into making an appropriate place to perform. Just to conclude, there is an opera called Leonora from 1852 that is composed in Mexico that actually gets popular in Europe by the composer Luis Baca Elorriaga. And Leonora is a story that a lot of European composers are interested in. It is also set by the composer Beethoven. He doesn't name his opera Leonora. He changes it to be named after the husband of Leonora, or the alternate character played by Leonora. And that's actually being done in San Francisco right now in the fall, and Beethoven's opera is called Fidelio. And the basic story is Leonora's husband has been put in prison and she has to go into the prison and assume an alternate male identity to try to save her husband. Beethoven loved this story and spent years and years adapting it. Some of his versions were called Leonora, some Fidelio after the character. And we think now it's possible this story is based on an American story because it might be the story of the French general Lafayette that helped us out with our American Revolution.
Be quiet, Nino.
And then he went back to Europe and he got thrown into prison, and his wife spent a lot of time saving him. So this same story was set by the Mexican composer Luis Baca, and all that music survives. You can see the title page as it was printed in Mexico City, Mexico, and you can see his handwritten full score on the right side, and that was reprinted along with one of his beautiful church pieces, a setting of the Hail Mary, the Ave Maria. So some Mexican composers started to be well known in Europe. So let me just conclude by playing you one last example of song, and that is of a waltz song. And there was a choir. They're not active right now. I think the conductor might be ready to retire. But there was a choir in San Francisco that specialized in all this kind of music, called the Coro Hispano of San Francisco. And they have an album available for free on YouTube. If you just put San Francisco, the word coro in Spanish, C-O-R-O, and Hispano, meaning Hispanic, you can find many, many tracks of popular music from Mexico, choral music from Mexico, sacred music from the early time of contact through the early 20th century. So let me let you hear just a little bit of this, an example of something that mixes Mexican church music with Mexican waltz songs, music that would have been popular in the early 1800s. And that'll be my last thing I play for you.
Cuando uno quiere a una y esa una no le quiere, es lo mismo si un calvo en la calle encuentra un pene. A la jota jota, vivan los toreros, viva la cuadrilla de banderilleros. A la jota jota, vivan los amores, viva la cuadrilla de Valentín.
That song is first written down in 1810. So let me go to my list of all the links that I've shown, and I'm just going to paste that list into the chat, and then you can copy it from the chat. And I'm also sending this right now to Professor Thompson, and he can make that available if he wants to. So let's see, stop sharing, go to the chat. And so I'm going to paste this into the chat, and then you can go to the chat and you can, take me just a second to do that, and you can copy it from there. Okay.
All right. Thank you. Laura, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay,
All
great.
right.
My Zoom
Cutting
is
and pasting
completely
right now.
my Zoom is completely crashed, so I don't have video, but I've been listening to everything here. What a great lecture.
Yep, that's
Yeah.
fine. Yeah,
Yeah.
my Zoom is a little strange too at this point.
Yeah.
Let me try opening my chat one more time. Do you have, it's not letting me paste this. Do you have a way to send an email out to the people who are participants? And
Yeah,
then
we can do that. We can
Okay.
make that available. So
Okay.
that won't be a problem.
Okay, oh, it's letting me paste smaller bits. All right, I'm just gonna do 4 or 5 at a time. And then if people want to go to the chat and copy it, that's fine. And if they would like to just get the links from you, that's fine. Then they can listen to any of this that they want. That last opera I mentioned, Luisa Bacca's Leonora, that was never recorded until 6 months ago. And so it's amazing to me that there's a lot of current interest in the 21st century to revive the stuff, to record this stuff. People are getting paid to do it. There companies that usually would just do Beethoven and Mozart and things like that are choosing to do Mexican music, Latin American music, South American music of the same period to complement the more familiar things we know from Europe. Okay, so I sent 2 links that were the introduction, and then I made a numbered list of 12 things that I was playing from, and they just included 3 last things that I didn't play a lot of. But if someone wants to pursue this further, the very last 2 things I pasted in, one says 19 free YouTube links by the longtime local choir, Coro Hispano de San Francisco. They've put all the albums they've ever made up for free on YouTube, which is awesome. And the very last thing I sent is a YouTube playlist I made if you want to watch full versions of any of the things that I've watched, that I've mentioned. I have full versions of operas and full versions of longer choral pieces. So you can spend time with it and get to know it better.
All right, Laura, thank you. Yeah, any questions from anyone tonight?
One person had asked a long time ago, do we know much about the songs of war? And no, we do not. The main people to record songs relating to war or stress in general are female American anthropologists sent out by the Smithsonian in the 1880s and 90s and the early 20th century. And they basically just went to cities near the new Indian reservations at that point and said, if any grandparents or great-grandparents would visit me in my hotel room, I have recording equipment and I will pay you to sing your old songs. And some of those songs are songs of war and songs of strife. But in general, the Spanish priests in Mexico were writing down songs that had to do with medicine. They would have said magic, but medicine, magic, and health, ceremonies of coming of age, love songs and sacred music. And that's what we have more information about.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. I'll be here for a little bit if you have any questions for me. And please, big hand clap for Laura. Or yes, some
Well,
kind
thanks
of
very much for asking me.
sign. And yeah, we really enjoy having you again.
Is
Good
there
luck
a
with everything
code
you're
for
working
Did we
on.
get the code word for this month, for this Zoom?
Oh yeah,
Oh,
they wanted to ask about the code word. I
Oh,
forgot.
the code word. Yes, I forgot. Laura, do you have another favorite dessert for us?
Let's use my niece's name. I'm gonna put it in the chat, Sochi, because that word that means flower. The little archaeological project is the roots of Mexico City is called Xochimilco. It's a little town you can visit, and if you type that word in, Sochi, you can find a lot of things related to earlier ancient native Mexican music as well. It has the word flower in it a lot, or Xochi, Xochi. So that's a super geeky way to give a code word for today, but Sochi would be great.
Sochi.
Yeah, it just means flower.
Yeah. What's Milko mean? Is that the water or the
It
lagoon?
it's the Xochimilco is the place of the floating flowers. So
Oh,
the Milco is more like place, but it's a wet, watery place.
interesting.
Yeah, the whole town is called Xochimilco, and they have brightly colored painted boats that float around and sort of like a national park about the roots of Mexico City.
Yeah, sounds really interesting. Okay, thank
Cool.
you.
All right, I will see you later, and I'll be in touch with you about other and related things. Thanks very much for asking me.
Okay, Laura. Okay, take care.
Okay, bye.
Xochimilco.
Or just Sochi, Xochi. I'm sorry, everyone. I can't see you. I think you can hear me.
It's
So
turned in by Saturday Sunday at a particular time.
those of you who are in the 8-week class need to have this in by midnight on Sunday. Yes.
Thank you, Professor.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You guys all have a good evening.
Now,
And
do you have to have, is there more than one code word?
there's one code word. It's Sochi, Xochi.
Okay. I was just checking. And then what is the topic for the essay? What is the essay question?
The essay, it'll be a synopsis of what you heard in the lecture tonight, 250 words.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay, good night, everyone.
All right, Professor. Good night.